A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime Daily, the podcast covering high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country every week. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. Our murder case this week is so huge that we have so much exclusive reporting that we are dedicating an entire episode to it. When someone is murdered in the driveway of their home and nothing is taken, and the victim is well liked and happily married with no problems, it is hard to figure out who would want this man dead. That's a big part of why this case was cold for 5 years with no leads. When you go down the list of why someone's been killed, mistaken identity is pretty much at the bottom of the list. And that is exactly what happened to this popular and internationally renowned martial arts instructor from the Coachella Valley who was gunned down in 2018. Police now say they have 2 men in custody who were actually going after his neighbor who coincidentally drove a very similar red truck. We're recording this on Wednesday, May 22 of 2024. Our guest today is a frequent contributor, Luis Bolaños, a former homicide investigator with more than 30 years experience. Luis also has his own private investigation firm called Get Bit Investigations. And the first time that Luis appeared on this program 4 years ago, it was to discuss this case, which he was working on. And Luis, you know, the amazing thing is while I was going back and looking at the podcast from 4 years ago, so many of your observations were absolutely spot on.
Yeah, it's stuff that I was trained to look for, nothing I invented, just back to the basics, 101. And hindsight's 2020, but yeah,
I mean, you called it
yeah,
out. I mean, it was
yeah.
just, it was so spot on again, you know, on what you said they were looking for. You said that this was a hit. You said that this was an execution. You described everything. And then when we now find out, according to one of those alleged accomplices in this case, it is, it's, it is spot on. Gosh. And your dedication to this case, just amazing. Just amazing.
No, I appreciate that, Anna. But I've said it before. It's when the gas and the motivation for that is the community. The community rang loud and clear that they wanted this solved and they cared. And they showed up for every single event, press conference we had, and really grasped onto the dear suspects, we will find you game plan. And it was just amazing. My phone, we put up a hotline. I probably got between 250 phone calls in 2 months, emails, text messages, people with ideas and concepts, and just wanted to see what they could do to help push this further. And I think that had a part to do with it.
I agree with you, Luis. I think people discount the helpfulness of people in the community and people on the internet, and police are constantly kind of, you know, pushing away and discounting what some will label internet sleuths. You know what? I'm just going to say that they are people who want to help solve a crime because they see an injustice. So, you know, you can label them whatever you want, but honestly, when it is through the power of people like that cases either get solved or at least you get very, very important details that maybe otherwise would not have been gathered.
True. Well, you named that a little bit. Anna's angry chorus, right?
Yeah.
That whole thing that's a real thing, right?
Right.
I mean, we'll get that in Webster's one day, but yeah, it's a thing, and it makes a big difference, and that's always a good step one when everything else seems to be closed.
Yeah. All right. So this case is out of Cathedral City, California, where jiu-jitsu instructor Mon Diaz, who was 48 at the time, was murdered on March 28th of 2018. He was a fourth-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he was killed outside his home just as he was returning from class, closing up shop. He owned his own studio. He was married to his wife, Mary Diaz, for 13 years. Now, 4 years ago, when you came on this podcast, here's what you said.
He's closed up shop, and he took about a 10-minute drive home, and like he does every night. And he backs into his driveway like he does all the time because he's vigilant. This is a routine he does because he's always teaching people to be vigilant, to be aware at their surroundings, and he practiced what he preached. He backs in, he gets out of his car, still in his dojo outfit, and he walks to his front door where he is shot in the face.
So were they trying to hold him up? Were they trying to break in? What do you think happened?
Well, we just don't know what their motive is. We don't believe it was a holdup because no money was taken, no property was taken. It was a straight execution. That was the goal of what they wanted to do.
So, Lewis, now we know based on court testimony, this was indeed an execution, except of the wrong man.
These clowns. Yeah, wrong guy. And the scary part about that, Anna, it could have been anybody. It happened to be Ramon Diaz that night, but anybody could have been in a red truck.
So as a result of this court testimony in April, now that is if you are to believe this career criminal, we find out, according to this testimony, that Ramon was never the intended victim here. They were looking for a neighbor of Ramon's who they referred to as Sean. That's not his real name, but that's how he's referred to in the court testimony. This is Ramon's neighbor. And according to the court testimony, Sean owed one of these guys $25,000 for a cocaine deal, and he hadn't paid up. And so they were coming after him. That was the motivation for all of this, except they got the wrong person. They got the wrong person. Let me tell you who we're talking about here. So Ramon is killed in 2018. Case goes cold for years. And then on July 25th of 2023, almost a year ago, police announced the arrest of two men, 48-year-old Kipko Griffin, who was taken into custody at his home, and 44-year-old Troy Edmond, who was already in custody on an unrelated charge. And the two of them are charged with the murder of Ramon Diaz, and bail was set so high, the two of them are sitting behind bars. Now, what didn't come out until April during a preliminary hearing, Lewis, and I'll let you take it from there, is that Kipko Griffin walked into a police station in May of 2023, last day, May 31st, to tell this unbelievable story, to basically, in his words, according to court testimony, to confess he was the driver and that they got the wrong man, that they were after a man named Sean. I'll let you take it from there, Lewis.
He walks into the Palm Springs Police Department. If you know the Coachella Valley, right, you have Palm Springs, Cathedral City, you have Indio Police Department, you have Desert Hot Springs. Three of those departments come into play here. They don't bite. They just not, no, we want to hear what you have to say first. And in that, they shut him down and they contact Cathedral City Police Department because it's their case. And of course, the two officers are well aware for Palm Springs of Ramon Diaz. It's been everywhere, and he was one of their own, right? He worked as a reserve for that same department, Ramon Diaz, years earlier. So they arranged an interview, and for some reason, somehow they end up doing the interview in Desert Hot Springs, a third department, where he ties himself into the homicide specifically as the driver, and talks about how he was hired or contacted by Troy Edmond because he knows him from prison. They have a relationship in prison through the jail system. So that's how the conversation starts. And I think it's really interesting because they talk about it in the prelim a little bit, but he's in there. They don't know, the officers don't know what information he's providing just as related to the Ramon Diaz homicide. And they give him and an admonishment. It's called the Behealer admonishment, which kind of tells you where their mindset is. And what the Behealer admonishment is what you give somebody who is not really a suspect at the time, right? It's not Miranda, that's different. But for the Behealer, because you want to make sure it's not used against you later by the defense, that the person giving you the information felt that they were in custody at some point. I'm concerned the way this interview was conducted because at some point it changed from Behealer to Miranda. At some point in those officers' heads, they were not going to let that guy go home that day. And I still can't tell by the prelim transcripts whether they did or didn't. But if in their mind, and they did physically put him in custody that day, and why wouldn't they? Then it's a Miranda situation, and Miranda was never read at that time to him.
So you're worried that somehow what he said at that time period, because of the way the information was taken, that it may make it vulnerable at trial.
I think it could. And there'll be emotions before trial.
And
right?
that's scary to me because,
yeah.
Based on, and we haven't really heard from the defendant in this case. The testimony that was, and all the information that was revealed in the hearing in April came from the officer, not from the defendant himself.
Correct.
Honestly, after everything that has happened with this case, first it's cold for 5 years. Then you find out that it, according to court testimony, was a case of mistaken identity. And now if you're telling me you're worried that that initial confession or whatever that was, that sharing of information, whatever it is that Pipko Griffin did that basically laid out what happened, if that's not admissible in court and this changes everything, honestly, that's when you just, how much, that is horrible. I can't even imagine that.
It's a concern. I don't see how it can't be a concern, and they're going to have to address that at some point.
Oh, gosh. As a True Crime Daily listener, you know the world can be a dangerous and unpredictable place. With every case that I've covered, I've learned one thing. Your best line of defense is your vigilance and your preparation. That's why I recommend Simply Safe Home Security. We hear stories every day, whether it's in the Nextdoor app or in a neighborhood group, of homes being broken into. It may happen while the homeowners are on vacation or sometimes even when they're home. But Simply Safe can help give you peace of mind. Named Best Home Security Systems of 2024 by U.S. News and World Report, Simply Safe can protect your home, your whole home, with sensors to detect break-ins, fires, floods, and more. It has a variety of indoor and outdoor cameras, and it is backed by 24/7 professional monitoring for less than $1 a day. Plus, there are no contracts and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Simply Safe has given me and many of our listeners real peace of mind. I want you to have it too. Get 20% off any new Simply Safe system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Just visit simplysafe.com/truecrime. That's simplysafe.com/truecrime. There's no safe like Simply Safe. So let's talk about what's revealed in this court testimony. Now, here's where I get super confused. Super confused. Okay, we already know, according to testimony, that this is a case of mistaken identity, that the two defendants actually were after someone else, someone named Sean. It's just a name that's used. It's not the person's real name. Someone who was a neighbor of Ramon's who owed them $25,000 for a cocaine deal. Here's what I don't understand, Louis. As described, they say that they go to this sports park called Big League Dreams, and that Sean, the person they're looking for, is identified there. Well, I'm really confused because Ramon was at work, right? So
Correct.
Did they really spot Sean at the park and then end up midway when they lose him, then then they go after Ramon because they see the red truck and it's the shiny object, and they don't even, and it's the address is very close, and therefore they just assume that's him.
Yeah, it's a question that has to be asked, right? That pops right to the top. Yeah, it's concerning. It's absolutely
So
concerning.
Ramon was not at this Big League Dreams park. Is that correct?
Correct. Ramon was at his studio, which is about 5 miles away from Big League Dreams. And yeah, he just happened to be coming home about the same time that Sean's softball game was over, coming home.
So Sean, we believe the intended target was at the park.
According to the testimony, if we're assumed to believe that, right? Yeah.
Wow.
And I
Amazing.
think that would be something easy to prove, right? Whether he was there or not for a game or just viewing a game. But he
Right.
was there. No.
So according to this testimony, um, the person who came forward with all this, Kipko Griffin, he tells in testimony, he says that he gets a call from his buddy, and that his buddy says, Troy says, I need you to help me. And what's the term that he uses?
To hit me up. They want to hit somebody up.
And then he's asked, right? He's asked, well, what exactly does that mean? But in your world, hit somebody up, if it's just a couple of guys going to go hit up a friend, that's totally different than some career criminals who are looking to pay back, to get their $25,000 back.
Well, there's a few terms, and look, it's a street term, right? And that term "hit me up" it's used a little differently from gang to gang to gang, right? If these folks have, I don't have 100% confirmation on it yet, but if they have some type of gang association, that's a term they use while they're chatting with each other. It could mean anywhere from hit someone up as simple as go have a conversation with them, to go intimidate them, or it's also a term that I had researched this, but it's very common now to ask, you hit somebody up, we're going to hit them up, what gang they associate with.
And just, to catch everyone up, when we first did this 4 years ago and reported on this case as a cold case, police did have, based on the surveillance cameras in the neighborhood and ring cameras in the neighborhood, they had a vehicle. They knew that there was a shooter and a driver, and because there's video of it, not enough to identify them. But then when you hear this testimony, it lines up with the video that was released to the public, but of course led to nothing. So he, as you said, according to court testimony, Troy pulls out a gun, puts a potato on it, and then the driver, right? So he gets out, the driver drives a little bit, tries to get closer to the house, which ends up being Ramon's house. The alleged hitman gets out. There's a single gunshot, is what is the testimony. And then the alleged hitman, Troy, allegedly, according to the court testimony, runs back to the car. They get in, they take off. And then I don't know how much later, whether it was a day or a few hours later, Troy calls Kipko and says, we got the wrong guy. We killed the wrong person.
Right. And how did they come to that realization? They saw the news, the media, and did that even make a difference in their mind? Who knows? Oops. But if that hit was at the direction from somebody, if they were still part of a gang and they were assigned that hit, because neither one of these clowns really have a way to support 25K in cocaine or have that type of cash on hand. That probably came from another direction, so higher up possibly. It could be, who knows, right? But that my first indication that money, that initial purchase of coke, was not funded by these two idiots, from a bigger source, which means that the person who was the initial intent for the hit, meant to be executed that night, that person may still be at risk because that money is still owed. And I have concern for that individual and his family. This may not be over. And I know they're taking that into consideration. And I'm sure this person and his family are living their lives different right now than they were 5 years ago.
So if all of this that came out in court is indeed true. It certainly does answer a lot of questions and to a degree lines up and makes sense. I always say when you hear the truth, it always like, boom, you just know it when you hear it.
True.
Okay. Now, what is frustrating about this case is that it took 5 years to make these arrests, and these arrests did not come because of dogged police work. No, it's because this guy, Kipko, walks in trying to get a deal and spills the beans. In the time between Ramon being murdered and this guy finally walking in, the family soon afterwards, because this case became cold very quickly, they turned to you and asked you for help. So what did you do to help them?
Well, basically went back to square one. I wanted to learn who Ramon Diaz was, everything good about him and everything bad, if both even existed. And all I could find out was he was just an incredibly wonderful human being, and we were lucky to have him in the Coachella Valley in the community. And everything he did and touched, he just earned respect, and his character was second to none, and his reputation was amazing. So that was a pretty good base to kick off and start educating the public as to who he was and why they too should care that he's been executed at his front door, because something's off here. So one of the first things I did after establishing who Ramon was, and speaking to team members that this is a case we're clearly going to take, is I went to interview people that were close, either in the area or close family members and close friends, and my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I mean, he had people just loved him. It's crazy. But within a few days of getting this case, I went and I interviewed Sean. This is the neighbor, and
Oh my God.
I stood in his garage and I interviewed him for, I want to say, about an hour. And when I left, I made a couple comments to my partners about my feelings after that interview. I never suspected him being involved in this in any way, shape, or form, but we did discuss, of course, the red trucks, just meant for him.
So what else I find interesting here is in those 5 years that this case was cold, you used several tactics. And first of all, you began your own investigation and you started from scratch to figure out, who's out there, who has what to say. And then you can't find any enemies. You really can't find any reason, any motivation, happily married, doesn't have any problems, doesn't earn any money. Again, all the things you look for. Nothing, none of this is popping. So I've seen you use this before, but you got these billboards up and you started holding these news conferences. What was the strategy there?
Well, again, it's a technique that was taught to me in law enforcement. So if they don't use it before calling a case closed, cold in 2 months, it just floors me. So I went back to what I was taught and what I've done in the private sector. That's absolutely effective. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It may not work, but many times it does. So I reached out once again to Lamar Billboards and explained the situation about Ramon and who he was. And I've had success with that before, and success with the billboard bringing in excellent information. And they were absolutely on board because they were part of the community and they cared. These billboards will run you 5, 6, 7K, depending on where they're located, a month. And they donated and they floated that board around the community for, I want to say, over almost 2 years. But at that time, we strategically put it where it was located in Cathedral City because we felt strongly that the suspects were driving by there all the time, right? And they would see it on a regular basis, and so were the people around them. So they would hear this conversation. There's other people out there that they admitted that they were involved in the shooting, right? And that may still come to fruition. But the tactic was just to educate the public and also to kind of push the suspects and maybe long shot, one of them will have a change of heart and want to first bite at that apple and get some type of immunity. We combined the billboard and the Dear Suspects, We Will Find You campaign that really took off, not just with the billboard and Ramon's family and friends, but in the social network. It was everywhere, right? And I had people send me 100 videos, because I asked for them, of just saying, "Dear suspects, we will find you." Just a 8-second blurb. And every time we got those, we put those out, and we got a lot of response to that. It just kept it. We did what else? We passed off look, basic boots on the ground stuff. We went with Ramon's wife, and we passed out flyers to the neighborhood, to the out 3-4 blocks every direction. And unbelievably, there were neighbors that, if it wasn't for those flyers, had no idea what had happened, right? Just months earlier. So it's just a way of getting information out there and showing people that there's another way to bring information forward if they to give them a choice. They wanted to call law enforcement or our hotline. And many times, for whatever reason, people don't want to call law enforcement. They'll rather call a hotline.
Right. It's easier to talk to you. This revelation, which is huge on this case, this is a case in the Coachella Valley that really, the entire community knows about. And here's what I find so stunning, that this court testimony occurred in April. And as far as the news reporting has gone on this case, when Ramon was murdered, there was coverage in the area, but not really outside of the Coachella Valley, because I was even looking in the LA Times. There really wasn't much that was covered in LA, certainly not nationally. Then when the arrests are made 5 years later, there's some reporting on it. But what we have shared with you here from the court record as to the reason this man was killed, that it was allegedly mistaken identity, and the details that we're providing, no one has reported this. Like, no one is on this case anymore.
Right. They didn't care at the beginning. They don't care now. So they are consistent, Anna. Right. It got very, very little airtime at the time. There was a reporter, one of the reporters, she is no longer there, who did care, and she's gone, and that kind of took care of everything. And her name's
And
Kitty
that's,
Alvarado. I have to give her credit because she was amazing in these type of cases.
yeah, Kitty Alvarado.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was. She's an amazing human. I think, we talk about true crime. I think these are the cases when we talk about, I say it at the beginning of every podcast, high profile and under the radar. We try really hard to cover the under the radar cases, really, because these are cases that need exposure and focus and light to be shined on them, because this isn't fair. What has happened to this family is not fair. Well, as you can imagine, Ramon's family has been suffering and looking for answers. And the news that Ramon was killed because it was a mistake has really made this so much harder to process. And I know that you, Lewis, have a very close relationship with Ramon's family, specifically his brother, Tony Diaz. And Tony is in Hawaii. And even though it's super early in Hawaii, Tony is going to join us now. Tony, welcome. And I'm so sorry for your loss.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate Lewis, at the helm of this through this entire process. But I'm grateful to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. You and Lewis, have a long relationship, and I'm going to let really Lewis do a lot here because you know him so well. But just the one question I have,
Yeah.
As you all in the family were trying to figure out who would want to kill Ramon, did you ever seriously consider the possibility that it was mistaken identity?
About 2 or 3 years ago, there was some mumblings about it that I think that maybe it was through law enforcement that they had an suspicion maybe, but nothing concrete. Outside of that, it was just really just it was just so it was just such a mystery that we couldn't even we were left to our own devices in that respect, just kind of conclude. But no, not really, nothing tangible. It just was a big shock for sure.
And Lewis, to find out again that this Ramon Diaz has lost his life because of something as ridiculous as mistaken identity in such a violent manner that he was murdered.
Right, right. And you know, there's a couple of schools of thought on how or why that occurred. And in discussions with Tony earlier, probably the top two reasons are that they were probably seriously impaired on something combined with stupidity. So I don't know what the appropriate blend is with that, but there was elements of both with that in both their systems that night. You know, the mistaken identity part of it's concerning on so many levels. But one of the things that drew our attention immediately, we'll get into this a little more detail later, is one of the first things I did after Tony's family brought us in was just simply pull up a Google search showing the street view of Ramon's home. I'm looking at the picture right now, and we can post it here for our viewers. But in that picture, you see Ramon's truck backed in, and you see the neighbor's truck, very similar, parked right in front of it, in front of their home. And at that time, we had a conversation with my teammates about, that's interesting.
So, Tony, when this happened, obviously something like this is so violent, so immediate, so traumatic. And the fact that even within the first few hours and the first few days, police were absolutely baffled because there was no sign of a holdup or that they were trying to break into the house or anything like that. Did your family start to get frustrated with the lack of answers that you were getting from police?
Certainly, certainly. And Lewis can attest to this. It went from obviously from shock, and as far as the community went, from shock to just disbelief, of course, and it just went into almost a sense of nowhere after that. Into, I think Lewis can correct me on this, within a couple of months it was considered a cold case. And
Correct.
so from the get-go, it felt very it just felt really sidelined, and that was that. And so it was incredibly frustrating. But yes, almost from the onset, it was a sense of we were on our own on this one.
And how did you end up connecting with Lewis and his team?
It's really just it's a great story. My sister Gabriella, she really delved into this, and she, through her research, she found that Lewis had been responsible in the Pinion Pine murders, or I forget now. It's been a long
that's
time,
them.
but she had done a little research, and she approached us and said, I think that we need to look outside of law enforcement and go the private investigation route. And I think this gentleman, and I think at that point maybe the crime had been solved pretty recently. Maybe she remembered. I don't recall, but it was my sister's doing, and she connected us, and ultimately we ended up in a conference call, and we knew right off the bat that Lewis was going to be the one to help us, and he did. He took on our case, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
Mm. And Lewis, I know you've been very close with the family for all these years. What was your tactic? I know, that we discussed it a little bit earlier on in the podcast, but what was your tactic and approach here?
I started to get a sense for who Ramon was in the community, and not just at work, but what he did, not necessarily his reputation, but more importantly, his character. And he was somebody that just his whole life, especially his adult life, contributed to the community in every way, shape, form you can imagine to help benefit further the community. He was a Palm Springs Police Reserve. He was the jiu-jitsu master, I think 4th-degree black belt. Does that sound right, Tony?
Yeah.
Right. A few champions under his belt. But more importantly than that, helping somebody win a championship was the love and the kids and the family he created in the jiu-jitsu community, which was brand new to me. And they're a tight family, and the structures and what builds them and what brings them together, and their mission statement was really impressive. But early on, to answer your question, Anna, I was really disappointed because I had never seen it my entire career where a case has gone cold so quickly. And that disturbed me. To me, as retired law enforcement, and especially what we do now, that was embarrassing. And I'm watching this family in shock because they just got the news a day or two earlier before they reached out, trying to realize this and how that could happen. And I didn't have an answer for them. It shouldn't have happened. It should not have gotten cold in 2 months. And I'll stick to that to this day.
Yeah.
So what we did, we decided to start from square one and interview everybody that knew Ramon that was there, and go to ground zero and try to find people that had never been interviewed by law enforcement, and hopefully get statements that would be beneficial to point law enforcement in the right direction. And ultimately, we did find a lot of folks that should have been interviewed that never were. So we decided, like you've seen it before, right? Or, you have to be squeakied, and you have to get public support to community to fall in and care, and make as a community ask the tough questions as to why this case has stalled, which is impossible at that point. And they did. It was I don't want to say it was a sell to the community, but it was an easy a mindset for the community to understand. We had I think 2 or 3 good-sized press conferences, and everybody was talking about Ramon Diaz, and that was really the key, the catalyst to getting this out on the forefront, the front burner, and getting community involvement and everybody talking about this and demanding answers, and and really having Ramon's back. He spent his career, his adult life, having his communities back. It was time to have Ramon's back. So we went down that road, and I pitched that to Tony and his family, and it seemed to make sense to everybody. So that was step one.
No one is ever prepared for the sudden and traumatic loss of a loved one, especially in this manner. And then really, I can't think of too many families that are ever prepared to deal with the aftermath in the legal system, not even the emotional trauma and how this forever has changed your family, but how you work with police departments and how you deal with prosecutors and investigators. And, the reason I do this podcast and the reason I do what I do is because it's all about justice. And I always have the same question for everyone. What would justice look like in this case? And justice for the families is such a difficult thing to achieve. And the justice system, the legal system, is so cold and harsh to the families and the victims. And so, I mean, how can any family navigate something like this, especially when the case goes cold and there's nowhere else for police to turn and they're not really working the case anymore? I mean, how did that feel to you and your family, Tony?
I I don't even know where to begin on that one. I think that what people should understand, if they can't put themselves in that position, is the victims, the families, everybody that cared for these individuals, their lives have been upturned. And so you're dealing with the consequences of that, all of the trauma, the confusion, and it's coupled with the justice system, which in most cases is either not moving or possibly moving backwards. So it's really adding insult to injury. You're looking for answers. You're looking for, I think, to a certain level, a sense of comfort, to be assured that as well or as humanly possible, things are going to be okay. Things are going to be handled through the justice system. And when you enter this oblivion of no answers, of phone calls not being returned, just it just really feels you really feel alone in this. And so it's like another added trauma to this of bereavement, right? Just the loss in the natural sense of losing somebody that you love, particularly to something so violent and inexplicable. It opens up an entirely different level of pain and suffering, I guess, if you will, particularly people that may not have the resources or are unable to, or where would you start with something like this? We had the good grace, by the grace of God to have Lewis and all these connections, and we go way further back, actually, thinking about it. But Lewis went to high school with my uncles and played football with them, so he's got all these like communal connections, right? And so I just can't imagine that if you don't have that, you're just really locked into this system that is, as you said, it's just cold and dark, and there's not a lot of guidance in that system.
No, it's not fair. And I always think it's very important that if the victims' families, if they want to be part of the conversation and sit down and talk about what's happened, that we provide a forum for them, because none of this is okay. I'm curious because of the timing of this, when they announced that 2 arrests were made, and this is now years later, and you've had to suffer through all the anniversaries and the reminders of everything and moved on with your lives and celebrated Christmas many times over without your brother. When you were notified that 2 arrests had been made, did they at the time say to you, your first question must have been, why? Like, why did they kill him? Were there any answers at that time?
That's a tough one. There were some answers, but they weren't official. It was more, I think that the one thing I will say is the method or the means by which we received the information was very was certainly off the record.
Okay.
It was, of
You
course,
got a heads up, as we would say, maybe.
We did, as a family, we did receive a heads up. It was, from my understanding, again, it was at an unofficial capacity, but we knew and now understood why and how things happened the way they did. And so, not until recently, until the pre-trial hearing, did it become obviously public. But
that hearing is unbelievable, right? I mean, the narrative in that court record, which was just in April, is absolutely astonishing. When you read that, Tony, and you hear how these 2, according to his testimony, again, innocent until proven guilty, how this whole thing went down. What was your reaction to that?
I think that I like to consider myself a logical person. I try to remain somewhat dispassionate about things and just be somewhat the voice of reason. And so when I process it, it doesn't come as a huge surprise that when you're dealing with that element of people. Obviously we're on the receiving end of their patterns and their objectives, right? And so it was more answers, but not a huge surprise considering the element, if that makes sense. It obviously checked off a lot of the boxes of understanding, but you're dealing with a criminal element, and where's the surprise in that, I suppose?
So if what was testified to is true, that it was complete mistaken identity and that they were not after your brother, it does give you an answer as to the why, but there's a part of me that makes me that much more angry, as opposed to, how can I put this? When you're grieving a loss and you finally have an answer, at least the puzzle pieces come into place. But then when you process that a little bit more, how unjust is this?
Certainly. I think that's at I think that's when I allowed myself to kind of really be angry for the first time. An innocent person, forget for a moment that it's my brother. An innocent person lost their lives, and everyone associated with that individual, i.e., my brother, their lives have been turned upside down. And so it's just the level of stupidity is I like to refer to it as a dirty bomb. Everybody got blown up in this. It everybody's lives got upturned. Of course, I'm angry over this. This for the first time, hearing the details is when I really allowed myself to be angry about it. Yeah, because you're dealing initially with the heartbreak, just everything that is being torn at the fabric of what of a family where five siblings, and you don't know how to answer anymore. You know, somebody asks you how many brothers do you have? I don't know. So I don't know how to answer that anymore. But hearing why is just it just enrages you. Like it was so senseless. It really, really angered me.
Lewis?
Understandable. Understandable. Tony, you and your family, especially you, have really amazed me on how you've been able to remain level-headed, understanding these issues you just highlighted throughout this entire horrible nightmare on what else to call it. But I mistaken identity. I mean, that is truly extremely rare that this happens, and to have it happen to such an icon, a role model of the community.
The man who came forward, Kipko, obviously, had he not come forward, we wouldn't know the level of detail that he testified to in court, describing everything, describing the alleged trigger man. When he came forward, he said he wanted immunity for his information, and the police said no. I don't know if now with a pending trial, I'm sure he's still trying to cut a deal for himself, that he should get something for coming forward. What is your opinion, Tony, on that?
Oh, I think that I think that it's senseless to think that any kind of deal would be cut. I would be disappointed if it were. I think it would be a travesty and an absolute injustice if any sort of deal were cut. Now, I don't understand how these things work. Can it lead to bigger and better things to give him something? As the family, I think that as long as he's incarcerated, and whether they shave off a couple of years or whatever is really insignificant to me, in terms of if it leads to more arrests, really getting to the core of this. But absolutely not. I don't think any kind of concessions should be made to this individual at all.
And you don't believe when he said that the reason he came forward was out of remorse, which I was like, wow, that remorse took a couple of 4 years, 5 years to come up with that.
Absolutely not. I think that had Lewis's pressure, and his team's pressure, had that not been a constant, I think this guy would have gone on with his life and would have never approached. I think that he felt that this wasn't going to go away. It was the pressure was always there. Uh, I don't, yeah, I don't believe at all that this is based on his moral compass. I think it was simply pressure, and I guess the old saying, right? Lewis could probably correct me on this, but the first one to talk, the first one to get the deal.
Well, there is something to that, but I just don't see at this point a deal coming his way. I've read the court transcripts from the last hearing, and his initial interviews, he gave up a lot of information without anything on the table at all. So for some reason, he did feel the walls were closing in on him.
Such a horrible situation.
Yeah.
Sometimes I really am at a loss for words. Tony, I know it's super early in Hawaii. Like, you joined us at 5 a.m. Hawaii time, and we are grateful to you. But before we go, I was wondering if you could just share with us your memories and just your description of who Ramon Diaz was.
Yeah, boy. That's wow. I could probably go on, but Ramon and I, people don't realize we were Irish twins. We were 11 months apart, and so we actually shared this. We were the same age, like 2 weeks. Pretty crazy. But so we were, excuse me, um, we were always close. Not just in birth, but um, as kids, my mom joked that she never really worried about us because we ran around like little ducklings. Uh, our eldest brother Alex, Ramon, myself, and then our sister Gabby. We just kind of ran the neighborhood, and and that's what I remember. Just us being as a family very close. Adulthood would take us into slightly different directions, but um, we did things together. We ran a neighborhood. We we played baseball together. We threw catch on the lawn together, Ramon and I, and he was always better at baseball than I was. But we just, it was neat. Just I do remember just being barefoot and just tossing the ball back and forth a lot as children. And um, as we got older, it seems like our lives not only were we chronologically a year apart, but it seems like our lives were always a year apart. From the simplest things, from getting allergies at a certain age, and he got them, and then I would get them. It's kind of weird, it's bizarre. Um, our relationships with people, early on a breakup, and then I would have a breakup a year later. It's just really funny how we kind of just navigated life through that, and eventually, um, we would end up working together for almost a decade, and as men, and we had lunch every single day together for almost a decade, and um, and then once again, life would kind of like take us in slightly different directions, but always very close. Ramon is really kind-hearted, as evidence of particularly his service. I think there must have been 1,000 people at his service, so it was standing room only, and it just said a lot about who he was. Super, super kind and generous, very even keeled, funny, really just kind of you see Ramon in pictures and he's always smiling, but Ramon had just this really clever sense of humor, and he's just irreplaceable. Um,
Oh
yeah,
my God, what this picture you just painted of having lunch every day with your brother. What a gift.
yeah, yeah. It's like anything in life, I suppose. It's you get these ebbs and flows in life, and that's a decade of my life that I can say, we spent very close together. Again, by uh, especially into adulthood, right? When we're forced into a house with our siblings, and you don't have a choice, right? But this was choice. Um, it had a huge impact on my life, my children's lives, my wife. Um, it just hasn't been the same since his departure. So
I'm so sorry. What really hit me there, Lewis, is when he said, I had lunch with my brother every day.
Yeah, something so simple and wonderful and beautiful, and it's just stolen away for life.
Because
But what
that's
a
where life
wonderful
happens
memory.
in the little things.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is just such a tragedy. It's such a tragedy. It is important to know what happened if this is indeed the truth. But kind of like Tony said, instead of feeling a sense of relief at knowing the answer, now it just makes you that much more angry. Angry that this was mistaken identity. Angry that it took so long for the police, right? They let it go cold. They didn't figure this out. This guy came forward. If Kipko hadn't come forward, we wouldn't even know that.
He was never on the radar until he walked through that door.
No, no. Oh my gosh. The other
Yeah.
thing that Tony said that was so funny. I mean, just because this is just life when he said, He had you went to high school with his uncle or something, or?
With his uncles. Yeah, they were incredible, wonderful family. Right. So again, even the cousins and nephews, just wonderful family, great humans, and people I really looked up to. Right, because just the way they behaved in life and their ties to the valley, the community, it's all good. It's all good.
And in a weird and wacky way, Lewis also went to high school with my fiance.
Well, there's that, right? It's just,
I
yeah,
didn't learn this. Lewis and I did not learn this into many, many years into our relationship.
yeah. How about that? So,
Life is weird that way. Life is weird. This is a tragic case with a twist that honestly, I don't think anybody truly saw coming. They knew that there was no reason to kill him, but let's face it, people who commit these murders, and you can't necessarily find a break-in, robbery, hold up, none of that stuff. It's perfectly reasonable to assume that if a career criminal was involved, right, that has no sense and dignity when it comes to life or respect of it, that they think nothing of killing someone. But this wasn't random. This wasn't random. Oh,
nope.
Lewis. Well, thank you for bringing this case to us 4 years ago. Thank you for bringing this case to us again today.
Thank you, Anna.
And I hope that we get justice. And I don't know what that's going to mean in this case. I really don't. I really don't. Lewis, where can people find you? Because once you're on, everyone is always looking for you.
Thanks, Anna. My social media footprint, the entire footprint's at getbitinvestigations.com.
And I'm at Anna G News. And you can get this episode. And we're going to also link to the original episode that we did 4 years ago, just because it's just so fascinating how spot on you were about things. So we're going to link to that, but you can find this episode, all our episodes, wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which has a community of more than 5 million. And that is where we all can share and talk in this community about what's happened in this case and other cases. And I always value your feedback. And you know that I respond and Lewis responds too. So we love to hear from you. Please join us in this conversation. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, which you can get at truecrimedaily.com. So until next week, this is True Crime Daily, the podcast. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. And as we always say, don't do crime.